So now we're going to talk about what's called the composition of functions. And one of the exciting things about function work is this idea of composition, and it gives us a new idea. Let me put up some functions here. So let's say you have f of x equals x squared plus 1. And g of x is equal to x minus 7. Okay, so you could evaluate those functions separately. We could give you a number, find f of 5, and that probably wouldn't be a problem. Now, because of the algebra of functions that we were studying in the previous videos, you could add those functions together, you could subtract them and multiply them and divide them. But composition is something new. By the way, on that last video, I forgot to mention those two functions weren't the same. There was a question, are they the same function? No, they weren't. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so when we're doing composition of functions, what we're doing is we're taking the function of a function, okay? So think of the function, think of f of x like a box. And you're putting in some value. It doesn't have to be a value, it could be an expression, but let's say you're putting in 5. So you put in the 5, and you get, 5 squared is 25 plus 1. You get out a 26. Okay? That's how functions work. You put something in, you get something out. Okay, and I think we talked about that before. But now what happens with a composition of functions? Let's say you want to find g of f of x. Sometimes I'll write it this way. Sometimes I'll write it with brackets. And then I'll give you some other notation in a minute. So what we just did was we found g of f of, well, we haven't yet. We just found f of 5, right? So we did that. We put the 5 in. We got a 26 out. Well, now what's happening is there's another box down here, a g of x, which says take x minus 7. So we found f of 5, right? It was 26. So now what we want to do is find g of 26. So it comes out of one box and goes into, the other box. And so in our case, we would have 26 minus 7, which would be what, 19? Okay, so that's not g of x, and it's not f of x, but it's g of f of x. So it's like you have two boxes. You put in 5, you're starting out with a 5, you put the 5 in, to the f function, you get out a 26. Then you take that 26 and put it into the g function, and you get out a 19. Okay, that's called the composition of functions. Okay, the other notation is with a little circle. So we would say g compose f of x. So it's like a little round circle. So it's not the word of in this case, or goff or whatever, but it's g compose f of x. And it means the same thing as what we have over here, g of f of x. And that's how we state it, okay? So sometimes what's tricky for students is to remember that it's these two that you're doing first. You're taking f of x first, and then you're going to take g of f of x. Sometimes it's easier to understand if you write it this way, but this is the notation for composition. You're not adding the functions, you're not subtracting them, you're not multiplying them, you're not dividing them. You're doing what's called a composition. Okay? Now there's some examples coming up where it's going to explain this idea a little bit more. I think that'll be helpful to you. It's called the composition of functions. The symbol for it is that little circle. Now you might be asking, well, could I do it the other way? Could I take f of g of x? Yeah. So let's look at that. Oh, there go my functions. But let's say you wanted to take f of g of x, which kind of looks like fog, but you could write that again as f of g of x, like that. So you would take g of x, and you're going to take that g of x and put it into the f function. Now I didn't give a value this time, but we know what g of x is, right? G of x is x minus 7. So then you could actually take that x minus 7 and put it into the f function. So the f function was, f of x was x squared plus 1. That's what they gave us. So now what we're saying is, what is f of x minus 7? Well, that's going to be x minus 7 squared plus 1. And then we can square that binomial. So again, if it's been a while since you've had some algebra, square the binomial. X squared minus 14x plus 49 plus that 1. So I think I might have gone over that in another video, but if you don't remember how to square a binomial, you could write it out and use FOIL. But you're going to get this part right there. That's the squaring of the binomial. And then we have that plus 1. So we would simplify that into x squared minus 14x plus 50. And so that would be, in this case, f compose g of x. And you might say, well, we didn't have a value this time. I could have had, x being 5 and see what happens. Or I could do that now, f of g of 5 and see what happens. Okay, we'll see more examples.